But just for the blood pressure purposes, how can nitric oxide help out in reducing a person's blood pressure?
Yeah. So as you know, we have a fixed amount of blood volume, right? And we've got a fixed amount of, it's basically a plumbing problem. So we're pumping a known finite amount of blood through really miles and miles of blood vessels. And so if you've got a fixed volume and the blood vessels are chronically constricted, now we've got the same amount of volume of blood in a smaller pipe. And so that leads to an increase in blood pressure. So what nitric oxide does is expands the blood vessels. So now we have the same amount of volume of blood going through bigger pipes, so there's less pressure exerted on the vascular wall. So when blood vessels are chronically constricted, it leads to an increase in blood pressure because we have the same amount of blood volume, just in smaller pipes.
There is a fact that as with the passage of age, especially after you get to the age of 40 years old and after, nitric oxide production seems to drop. Do we have an idea why it actually does that?
Yeah, so it does. So when you look at population-based studies, you see an age-related decline in nitric oxide production. But we know that this is completely preventable and reversible. So it doesn't have to be that. So it's really the American lifestyle. So it's everything that we do. It's the Western diet, the standard American diet. It's lack of physical exercise, and it's use of things like mouthwash, antacids, and certain pharmacological agents that have been shown to decrease nitric oxide production. So everything we do as Americans in the Western kind of lifestyle causes an uncoupling of the NOS enzyme due to oxidative stress and oxidation of tetrahydrobiopterin, which leads to a decreased production of nitric oxide, and now that sets the stage for the rapid onset and progression of cardiovascular disease. So we know exactly how nitric oxide is produced. We understand what goes wrong in people that can't make it, and now we can start to employ strategies that would lead to that would prevent this age-related loss of nitric oxide production. And that's our objective, is to give people the knowledge and the information that they can take control of their own health and prevent this age-related decline in nitric oxide production. Because now we know if you can prevent the loss of nitric oxide, you can prevent many age-related diseases.
Right. You just saw that a graph that I actually pulled up from one of your papers, I think from your website. And this is a very interesting graph describing different types of diets. And you mentioned the American lifestyle and the American dietary habits. And this chart is fairly interesting. I'm going to go back there. Can you walk us through this chart? What are people seeing and what can people learn from this?
Well, today we understand there's two ways the body makes nitric oxide, and we need nitric oxide from both pathways. And when we lose the ability to make nitric oxide from both pathways, that's when symptoms and disease set in. So the first pathway we talked about was in the lining of the blood vessels through an enzyme that produces nitric oxide. The other compensatory and redundant pathway to make nitric oxide is through the diet. So certain dietary patterns have you get an abundance of a molecule called inorganic nitrate. It's found primarily in green leafy vegetables. And then the body, through the oral microbiome, can metabolize the nitrate found in certain diets into nitrite and nitric oxide. But it's a very inefficient system. So we need a certain amount of nitrate in our diet in order for these inherent reduction systems to take place and generate nitric oxide. So what this graph here is, the dotted line is the threshold of nitrate you would need in any given meal to produce enough nitric oxide to normalize your blood pressure. And so we've sampled different dietary patterns. You can see the purple one there is a Japanese diet, which is known to be probably one of the most health-promoting.
Is that the Okinawan diet? Is that the Okinawan diet? Because Japanese right now are also consuming McDonald's, and we have Americanized the world, including Japan. I believe the basic Japanese diet that people talk about, where they have a lot of centurions, is the Okinawan diet. So right. Which diet does this specifically refer to?
So yeah, that would be the traditional Japanese diet, certainly not the modern Japanese diet, because a lot of these countries have become westernized and starting to eat like Americans, and their health is showing the consequences of that. So yeah, on all of these, we take kind of a standard sampling of what are the major kind of food and dietary patterns for this particular population. So we've done it with the traditional Japanese diet, the Okinawan diet, and then the dietary approaches to stop hypertension. The selection of certain foods through the DASH diet far exceed that, and I think mechanistically that explains why certain diets are cardioprotective that lead to the prevention of cardiovascular disease, these centenarians that live long, healthy life without any incidents of heart attack or stroke or cardiovascular disease. And to the contrary, almost all other dietary patterns fall well below that threshold to produce any nitric oxide.
What about the Mediterranean or the European diet that you have mentioned here? What does this actually relate to? And the vegetarian diet? Can you maybe talk about these two?
Yeah, so the vegetarian diet, and we followed up on this, and we've actually sampled food from certain regions across the U.S. So vegetarian diets can be cardioprotective and can lead to an increase in nitric oxide production. But as we published in 2015, it depends on where you live and which vegetables you're consuming, because there's regional differences in the nitrogen content of soil, and therefore the assimilation of nitrogen in the form of nitrate in certain vegetables. So the darker the green leafy vegetables, typically the higher the nitrate content. But it also, there's a 100-fold difference from the nitrate content in celery in Dallas and Chicago versus what is found in celery in New York, for example. And
let me stop you there. So why is that? Is there a big difference? And does having vegetables produced organically, does that also make any difference?
Yeah, it does. So the regional differences are based on a number of different factors. There's a whole field of agronomy that describes and it really explains how do you maximize crop yield with the maximum number of nutrients. So here's what we're finding, that lightning fixation is required. A lot of lightning storms are required to fix nitrogen, to break the triple bond of N2 that's found in our atmosphere. And then that high energy from lightning breaks the nitrogen bond N2 and fixes it into usable form, primarily ammonia and inorganic nitrate. So down in the south, in the Rust Belt, there's a lot of lightning storms. So it fixes the nitrogen in the soil, and you get more nitrate in the soil in the form of nitrogen. And the other thing is, there's farming practices, differences in farming practice, whether you're using standardized nitrogen fertilizers, or you brought up a good point, what about organic? In our 2015 paper, we published that organic vegetables have about 10 times less nitrate than conventionally grown. And when you think about this, to get an organic label in the US, obviously you can't add herbicides or pesticides, but there's also restrictions on adding standardized nitrogen as fertilizer to the soil. And when you don't standardize the amount of nitrogen going into the soil, you really have a high degree of variability and really no known nitrogen content in the soil. So as a consequence, most of these soils are nitrogen deficient, and therefore the vegetables or the plants that are grown in the soils don't accumulate nitrate, as well as many other nutrients.
Okay, so a question. So I'm not clearly sure about what makes a vegetable organic. Can you add manure, or for example, that would have possibly a significant amount of nitrates? Is that a possibility with organic foods?
It is. So to get an organic label, no herbicides, no pesticides, no standardized fertilizers. But you can add compost, you can add manure and natural sources. But the challenge is nobody ever standardizes that, right? There's a high degree of variability that depends upon the manure from which animal, what did the animal's diet consist of? And so there's high degree of variability. So there's no standardization of the nitrogen when you do this organically. So there's a high degree of variability. And so I think organic is good because you're not getting the herbicides and pesticides. But from our food surveys, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get enough nitrate from eating organic vegetables because of the lack of nitrate in these vegetables.
Okay. So back to this graph. What about the Mediterranean diet? Have you had the chance to look at that?
Yeah, we've looked at the Mediterranean diet, and look, and so let me just qualify what we've done here. We're only looking at the nitrate content. There are many other micronutrients and macronutrients in these dietary patterns that contribute to human health. So what we're showing is just what is required in the form of nitrate. And so it's the select choices of certain foods and vegetables that contribute to that. The Mediterranean diet is high in omegas and olive oil and good fats and less carbs and more good high quality protein and good quality fats. So those contribute very little to the nitrate burden on these vegetables. So I think it's a mixture, and we get our nutrients from a diverse selection of certain foods and dietary patterns. But what we're looking at, what we're quantifying here, is if we wanted to silo this and only look at the ability of these foods and dietary patterns to produce nitric oxide, then really it's dependent upon the nitrate content in these foods. So there may be other health benefits of certain dietary patterns that are completely independent of nitric oxide production.
Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you as a valuable viewer. And if you liked this segment, you can watch all of the different individual segments or the whole podcast to have a broader understanding on this topic. Just check the links in the description or what you see on the screen right now. I'm Dr. Umer Khan. Looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you.